But if you ask Generation Z, they're strongly pro-Palestinian. The United States was founded on white supremacy.
In this clip from the Triggernometry YouTube channel, one of the world's leading historians, Niall Ferguson, exposes Generation Z's large pro-Palestinian support in the ongoing war in the Middle East, their support for socialism over capitalism, their belief that the world is ending, and their absolutely horrible education. Watch it here.
What do Gen Zers believe that we don't?
Well, let's just take an example that I've been looking at recently. If you ask Americans about the crisis in Israel, about the attacks from Gaza and the Israeli response, the general public is pro-Israel. Older Americans are very pro-Israel. But if you ask Generation Z, they're strongly pro-Palestinian. Like 11% of them are with Israel, and 37% are actually with the Palestinians. That's a huge shift. There are other shifts too. If you ask Generation Z, what's your preference, socialism or capitalism? Close to 51, 52% will say, actually, we prefer socialism.
Fuck me, sorry. As somebody who's experienced socialism.
We both have.
Yeah.
Well, anyway. I grew up in the west of Scotland, which is the nearest thing to socialism that was on offer in the UK, but then spent time in the 1980s in the Soviet Union and in East Germany. Yeah, I share your expletive deleted response. But that's what's going on. And I could go on. It's interesting that on issues of the environment, young Americans and young Europeans are willing to contemplate quite authoritarian solutions because they feel that the planet is dying and we've only got 10 more years to save it, and therefore drastic measures are warranted. So Yashamonka's been making the argument for some time that there's a lot of illiberalism amongst the young, and that I think is concerning. It's not surprising, though, because if one actually looks at the ways in which they're educated, there's a real predominance of content that is more indoctrination than education. People underestimate the extent to which even quite young children are being taught to believe that the United States was founded on white supremacy, or that the planet is being killed and the only way to stop it dying is zero growth. These ideas are quite widespread.
Now, Ferguson goes into the horrible education of Generation Z and uses a personal experience as an example to show how far to the left the education institutions have gone, and how older people can't believe that their old universities have become so corrupted.
And so one can't sort of say there's something terribly wrong with Generation Z. I think we've just allowed the educational system to move much further to the left than most people realize. I had lunch today with an old friend who is a little older than me and went to Princeton. I suppose he must have been there in the 1970s. And I found it quite hard to persuade him that his son won't have the same experience that he had. There's a lot of denial about how far Princeton or Yale or Harvard have swung to the left amongst people who haven't had that much to do with university life since they graduated. So I think there's something going on here which is pretty worrying. If you tell young Americans, or for that matter, young British kids, as happens, your history, your country's history is actually quite bad. The United States founded on white supremacy. Britain, basically slavery. Industrial Revolution, slavery. If you tell those stories, unsurprisingly, impressionable school children think, blimey, that's history, and we should really feel quite bad about that. That's happening, and it happens with parents not quite noticing. A lot of people noticed during the pandemic because they kind of overhearing the Zoom classes and thinking, hang on a minute, what did he just say? And I'll give you an illustration of what goes on. Now, this is, of course, something that I pay a lot of attention to, and I'm sure a few parents do, but at the school that my sons were attending in California, there was a proposal to have a module on slavery, kind of part of civics or whatever, social studies. And I said, good, I think it's important that you should teach this part of American and indeed world history. But I'd be curious to know what teaching materials you'll use. And the teacher very obligingly sent me them, and I did a little bit of research and looked at these teaching materials and tried to trace their provenance. And it turned out that they, in fact, originated with the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is one of the most crooked, despicable rackets that ever emanated from the civil rights movement. And it has made a business for itself in recent years by compiling lists of Islamophobes and white supremacists, and they really set themselves up as witch-finders general for the dreaded right. And one of their lists actually included my wife, Ayaan Hirsi Ali. She was on the list of Islamophobes. There wasn't a comparable list of Islamic extremists, mind you. They didn't have a list. Anyway, so I looked a little more closely at the materials, thinking this is a strange source for teaching materials for children. And sure enough, when I got to the takeaways, because you always have takeaways in the teaching plan, the takeaways included the United States was founded on white supremacy, and the situation of African Americans today is little different from their situation under Jim Crow. Now, I wrote to the teacher and I said, I don't think these are appropriate teaching materials at all. This is not history. This is political activism. And to her credit, she saw my point and they didn't use them. But unless I had unless I'd bothered to do that, I might not have noticed. And I think most parents actually aren't aware of what kind of thing gets done as history now. They just assume it's pretty much what it was like when they were at school. History was boring, and if you were in Britain, you did kings and queens. If you're in the United States, you did Lincoln or George Washington. It's not like that anymore. That's all been changed in the same way that history at the major universities has greatly changed in the nature of its content. So we have a generation that I don't think has the same relationship to history as even you, I mean, you're much younger than me, even you did, because this is all of relatively recent provenance. Things have moved quite fast in the last 10 years.